So it's just about that time. So hello and welcome to the Voices from the Hydrosphere lecture series presented by the Oklahoma State University Museum of Arts. I'll be your host today. My name is Christina Elliott, and I am the Associate Curator of Education for Academic Initiatives here at the OSU Museum of Art. Before we get started today, I wanted to take a moment to plug our website and community programming. We happen to have an OSU environmental science class synchronistically streaming today's lecture. So I'm going to stall for a minute or two to allow them to take a very quick quiz as they start their class period. So what a perfect opportunity to plug some of our programming. I'll take this time to encourage you, if you haven't already, to visit our website. There you can see all of Robin Lasser's full-length films that are featured in the exhibition. The Theater of Water Reclamation features today's speaker, Luann Fisher, and is probably one of the most popular films and artworks in the exhibition. Our museum website is www.museum.okstate.edu. We also have a YouTube page, a Facebook page, and a variety of social media outlets that you can tune into to learn more about our programming. So get involved. Like I said, you can watch all of Robin's films. You can check out fun tutorials and art making activities related to the exhibition and our permanent collection. You can always register for Second Saturday kits or any of our community pickup kits. This month in November, we will be featuring an activity that we call Create a Friend for Pokey the Piranha. And so you'll be making your own fish, creative fish form out of recycled materials. These kits are provided completely free for the community. Thanks to a donation from our advocates. You can also schedule a tour or check out our open gallery hours on our website and sign up for our mailing list. If you have any questions about anything, you can contact us by emailing us at museum@okstate.edu or call us at 405-744-2780. All right, so let's get into today's lecture. The Voices from the Hydrosphere lecture series was created to highlight the research and partnerships that were developed in our main gallery exhibition, The State We're in Water, Constructing a Sense of Place in the Hydrosphere. Today's talk will feature Luann Fisher, who will share more about wastewater treatment process and what we can do to help keep our water clean. Luann Fisher was one of the community experts that was interviewed by our artists, and her knowledge and insight helped them shape their arts-based research. They were likewise impressed by Luann's creativity, and she is also featured singing original songs about wastewater treatment in Robin Lasser's film, The Theater of Water Reclamation. Luann Fisher earned her bachelor's degree in chemistry from Cameron University in Lawton, Oklahoma. She spent 3 years during college at Fort Sill and the Oklahoma Department of Defense's Center of Environmental Initiatives and Hands-On Training Center. After that, she was with the city of Lawton in water and wastewater treatment and industrial pre-treatment for 10 years. Luann also spent 3 years in Iraq and Kuwait during Operation Iraqi Freedom with the company KBR Halliburton, working in water and wastewater treatment, environmental compliance, hazmat, emergency response, and safety. In 2007, she took the position with the city of Stillwater as the environmental programs manager, where she eventually became the wastewater treatment facility superintendent and then the compliance coordinator. Currently, Luann is working on relocating to the city of Broken Arrow to start a new adventure as the manager of their Verdigris River Water Treatment Plant. So on behalf of the OSU Museum of Arts, I am pleased to introduce Luann Fisher, who will be sharing an enlightening talk with us today titled Wastewater to Clean Water, the Human Component.
Thank you, Christina. It's so good to be here. First, I want to thank you for allowing me to share my passion with you today. I'm glad you're listening. I have words for you about clean water and dirty water that will impress you to take part in the process of saving our water sources. If nothing else, you will know and understand the cycle of water as a gift to revere. The word must be spread, and you must know the truth. Water doesn't create itself, nor does it change by itself. It's the human component that changes it. The actions we as humans give to the environment according to what we need or what we want causes an impact for the better or the worst of it. The reuse of wastewater is quickly coming upon us as we think is our new resource, but I am here today to tell you that we have actually been recycling it all along. I will tell you what I know about wastewater treatment to give you a better understanding of how we've been recycling water since we first began life, and how its cycle prompts us to pay attention to nature and what it means to hold it in reverence as a valuable resource. After all, water breathes and moves. It chokes, but it doesn't grow. We have just as much water now as we did at the beginning of time. So as I begin to speak to you today about wastewater to clean water, I want to introduce to you some things that you may have already heard about in wastewater treatment, but I think you'll find them very interesting. Next slide, please. So what is wastewater really? It's water that has been used in the home, in a business, or as part of an industrial process. Next slide, please. Where does it come from? Well, it comes from single-family homes, apartments, and any non-business. So it's divided into two categories, domestic and non-domestic. And EPA considers domestic an exempt source of pollution, whereas the non-domestic, which is small businesses, medical facilities, auto body shops, food services, photo processing industry, the list goes on and on. They consider them to be, excuse me for just a minute. I'm sorry. They are considered to be a possible source of pollution, and there are rules and regulations put in place to govern their discharge to any municipality or waters of the state. Next slide, please. So water doesn't choke. Well, it does choke, but I choked. So anyway, so where does it go? Okay, so I think everybody's familiar with flushing the toilet, taking a shower, washing machine discharge. Watering your lawn doesn't necessarily go to the wastewater collection system. It goes to the stormwater collection system. Some cities are combined sewer and stormwater, but Stillwater's is not. It goes in the collection system and then runs through different pipes all the way out to what we call a wastewater treatment plant. Next slide, please. So I'm going to focus on the Stillwater wastewater treatment plant because that's the one featured in the film. The plant is spread out on 40 acres. There are 8 different buildings that house pumps and motors and various equipment that allow the wastewater that comes in to travel through each process. We call it a process train because it goes from one process to the next, and it gets cleaner and cleaner as it goes, and then it finally, at the end, will discharge into Brush Creek. So you can see the red arrow where it goes out from that one part of a process. It's called the cascades. It's a step down where the water runs and oxygen is added. So you'll see a slide of that near the end. And the wastewater goes through 6 processes before discharge to Brush Creek. The average daily flow for the Stillwater plant is 5 million gallons a day. Next slide, please. Okay, here's a flow diagram I think you'll find interesting. So first the wastewater comes in, it's the influent, and it goes through a preliminary treatment, which is usually a screening process to take out the large solids, which could be anything from wipes to tires to, could be $100 bill, who knows? And then it goes into the primary clarifier, which is a conical shaped basin that has a rake arm at the bottom where the sludge will settle out. So the sludge, through every single process that it's pulled out, will all go to the same place, which is a digestion process. And then the clean water goes through each process and gets cleaner and cleaner. Then the next thing would be the aeration tank. That's where all of the microbes are. That is the center of all the treatment processes. That is the most important. Well, they're all important, but that's the most important because that's where the bugs live. You might have heard me singing about the bugs being happy. The entire set of processes, the entire treatment train is dependent upon those bugs being happy. And when they're happy, there's a proper pH, there's a proper temperature, there's a proper amount of bugs of different types. And when it gets imbalanced, it starts acting up, and then the rest of the plant will also start acting up. After that, it goes to a secondary clarifier, which is something like a polisher. It gets cleaner there, and it attracts birds and ducks and things like that. And then it goes through disinfection. Disinfection for the wastewater plant in Stillwater happens to be ultraviolet. So then it goes out to the creek and it's good to drink, actually. Next slide, please. Here's an aerial. The 2 lines that you see with the little black arrows on them are the pipes that come into the plant. We have one coming from the northeast and we have one coming from the southwest. The northeast is a 42-inch and the southwest is a 36-inch pipe. They come into what we call the Headworks, and that is the very first process that begins the train of processes. Next slide, please. Here's process 1. I talked about screening. These are actually bar screens, and they have little rake arms on them. They go down about 30 feet into the ground to where the influent pipes come in to a junction box. And those rake arms go around and around and around. This again comes up the front and goes out the back. So it'll pull things up and it'll dump it into what we call a dumpster or a roll-off or whatever that's in the back of the bar screen. Next slide, please. This is the primary clarification. As you can see in the bottom slide, there is a scum box. The arm that goes around the top will scrape off grease. It will scrape off such things as condiment packets that are light, that float. It'll scrape off condoms, if you don't mind the language, and any other kind of scum that rests on the top. And then on the bottom, it has another rake arm, and going around really slowly, it allows the sludge to settle out, and then it deposits it into another box that goes on to where the sludge is processed. Next slide, please. This is the activated sludge. This is the best smelling part of the plant. If it's run properly, it will have a musky kind of smell. You get familiar with it, and it's not bad. It smells like dirt. It smells like something you want to put in your garden. We watch for the foam on the top to look like it does in this picture. If it's too foamy, like really thick white foam, there's something, the bugs are too young. There's too many young bugs compared to the older bugs. And then if the foam is dark and brown, then there's not enough young bugs. They're not reproducing. So there are certain things that we look for every day on an hourly basis to determine whether the bugs are doing what they need to be doing. Next slide, please. And final clarification, it operates the same as the primary clarification, except that you're going to keep a sludge blanket on the bottom. You're going to try to keep it about 3 feet in height. It's kind of a buffer. So we have what we call return and waste activated sludge pumps. So we'll draw some of the old sludge out, and then we'll put in some of the new sludge, and it's like a continual thing that we do for the 24 hours, 365 days a year. Next slide.
Hey, Luann.
Yes.
Can I pause you right there? We had a question that I think is important.
All right, let's do it.
Can you just quickly tell us what you mean by bugs?
Microbes. They're seen under the microscope. Now, these microbes are actually not new to be added to the wastewater to do the treatment. They actually come from us. They're already in our system, and this the processes that allow the water to be cleaned at the treatment plant are the same bugs that are already there that come into the plant. The trick is to keep a balance. There's 5 popular bugs that break down and process the poop, and it takes a certain balance. You don't want to get too heavy on stoxyliates or too heavy on rotifers. You want to have an equal balance so that they can work together as a team to break down the solids. Does that answer the question? Okay, all right then. So then this is the last, well, it's not the last process, next to the last. These are the UV lamp units. There's 2 channels that the water flows through, and they get UV disinfection. The Stillwater plant was actually one of the first in the state to ever have UV disinfection. It's had UV disinfection for probably since the 70s, which is something that was new at the time rather than the chlorine gas treatment that disinfected the wastewater. Next slide. And here it is pulled out of the channels. The Stillwater plant is only permitted to test for fecal matter or E. coli to the creek in the effluent water 5 months of the year. So after that time is up, we pull those units out one by one. We take them to the shop. We clean them. We check all of the electronics inside of these boxes. You can see the lids are flipped open toward us. And we change the bulbs and get them ready for the next season. And then we put them back in and just, wait until the season is started again, which would run May through September. Next slide, please. And this is the final process. The step aeration, the cascades that I told you about, it just adds a little bit of air to the water before it goes to the creek so that we don't have a DO problem, a dissolved oxygen problem. We want to make sure that the creek has plenty of air to keep all the wildlife alive. At the bottom, you can't see it, but there is a 36-inch hole with some rebar on it to keep out any critters that might, fall in. And that pipe goes straight out to the creek, to Brush Creek, which is tributary to Stillwater Creek. Stillwater Creek then does wind up in Keystone, so, and Texoma, whichever way all the water flows, you know, it flows north to south. Now, the importance of this being clean enough to drink is because it is someone else's drinking water downstream. So we want to make sure that we send the cleanest water possible downstream to other users so that they can treat it and drink it. Our water treatment plant is north of town, and it comes from Lake Caw. And there are other users that discharge, and it makes its way to Caw Lake. So everyone downstream of someone else is drinking someone else's treated wastewater. And that's where the recycling comes in. Next slide, please. Okay, we talked about the sludge digestion. Throughout all the processes, there's a certain amount of solids that are pumped out, and they go into this big tank, and it's probably about 26 or 28 feet deep. It's heated, and it has a mixer in it so that it can kill all bacteria before it is pumped out into these sludge beds that we suck the sludge out with a sludge truck. And we have a 4,000 gallon sludge truck, and you can see the acreage behind it. There are 310 acres surrounding the plant that we take this sludge injection truck out to, and on the back end are injection tubes that they're kind of like a claw, and they are lowered into the ground. And so the wet sludge is then injected 6 to 12 inches underneath the dirt. And we rotate fields throughout the year. Once one field has been injected, then it can't be used for at least another 30 days. You can't have animals on it, cows, you can't have people on it. So the access is restricted, and then we just move on to another field and do the same until we've rotated throughout all 5 designated fields. Next slide, please. You can see the plant, and you can see the acreage around it. Solids are settled out of 4 of the 6 processes. You know, we don't pull solids out of the UV or the step aeration. There's 310 acres surrounding the plant for sludge injection. 7,884,000 gallons per year of wet sludge are injected into those fields. 562 dry tons, and that's 1.2 million pounds, just for you to get an idea of how much solids comes from the citizens of Stillwater. Next slide, please. So, what not to flush or put down the drain? Wipes are not flushable, no matter what the label says. I can go down the aisle of the store and I can see somebody getting ready to buy a packet, and I just can't help myself. And I say, oh, by the way, those aren't flushable. And usually I get a, well, how do you know? Or what do you know? And I get the chance to get on the soapbox and tell them a little bit more about it. It's about the education. That's why we educate people. Oh, well, here's a question. What happens with the soil in the injected fields? It grows a crop, we harvest a crop, and then we start all over again. The soil is not removed. It's just a nice, rich soil. Someday, maybe we'll get to the point of composting it, and that's in the future. It's a pretty expensive thing to endeavor to take on. Okay, so wipes, grease, utensils, female applicators, believe it or not, they float. And even though people think that they're gone forever and they went into a deep, dark hole, they do surface at the wastewater plant. Condoms, same thing. Diapers, gloves, syringes, pharmaceuticals, and pesticides. So to say something about pharmaceuticals and pesticides, I'd like to add that these are not removed through conventional treatment. which is what wastewater treatment is about. The treatment plants were not designed to treat pharmaceuticals and pesticides. They're not designed to remove those. We call those a pass-through, meaning they pass right on through to the creek or the lake or the river or wherever a wastewater treatment plant discharges to. So these are the things that go downstream to our neighbors. So I plead with you to not dump your pharmaceuticals down the toilet. I know that the state of Oklahoma Health Department does their code for nursing homes and hospitals is to flush unused, outdated pharmaceuticals down the toilet, and that's a law that I would like to see changed. We do have collection sites here in Stillwater. Most cities have them now where you can take those, and it's very discreet. They're collected by police officers, and your name doesn't ever get known. Those are accounted for in a computer program, and then they are given to the OSBI for incineration. That's more the proper way. I know that pharmaceuticals do come from people who are on medications, and I did a study in Stillwater with 10 manholes, sampling 10 different manholes throughout the city, and found too numerous to count, types of pharmaceuticals in the wastewater, from estrogen, testosterone, vet anesthesia, diabetes medication, and what's worse, painkillers. And so I have a really big heart for pharmaceuticals and pesticides being removed from the wastewater system or the water treatment plant. You know, send the citizens some water without those things in it. And pesticides, I can tell you that a lot of the times that bugs or microbes are wiped out in a plant, it's because somebody put some pesticide down the drain. It only takes a capful of diazinon down the drain to wipe out a population of these bugs. So that is, and read the labels on pesticides. More is not good. More is not better. You read the labels, you apply it exactly like it says. I don't know how many times I've walked my dogs on the sidewalks, and during a certain time of the year, there'll be crystals of, of pesticides or emergents that have been applied, and I get home and have to wash my dog's paws because they've got those in there and they're gonna lick those off. Just be really careful is what I like to say about pesticides. Next slide, please. Those are wipes. We inserted a screen into a manhole to see what we collect, trying to keep wipes out of the wastewater plant, because these wipes, they gather together and we call them rag balls. And when there's enough of them in a pump, it'll clog up and break down. And so the citizens are paying extra dollars to keep these things repaired all the time. And if we can reach the citizens and say, just don't flush them, that would be so helpful. But that's 30 minutes. That screen was in 30 minutes and we pulled it up and it's like, wow. So there you can see the problem. Next slide, please. This is an animated picture of a bar screen. You can see at the bottom of the bar screen in the water, it looks like little fingers. That's a rake arm that pulls up. And you can see the tree in the middle. That's also a rake arm, and it's caught that. And then the one at the top, it is rotating around and dumping it into that bin. Don't be shocked about the wipes. That's a question. It's a comment. Nice. Thank you. Spread the word. And look in the middle, if in the water, you can see those little white things. Those are wipes. You can see how they get through. They just go right through. And look, there's a tire. There's a bicycle. And that operator is looking at that bin, and I think he's shaking his head. He's like, oh man. I got to take these out of there. You know, that stuff's been in the wastewater and you wonder, how does it get in there? We have had clogged manholes and gone out at different times and it'd be full of construction debris. You know, so there's some new apartments going up and then they have these issues with their sewage not, it's backing up and everything. And we look in all the manholes around the area that, and there's pieces of 2x4s and, you know, gloves and a hard hat, or there's all kinds of construction debris in there. And these are not just dumping holes. And what you put down the drain does go somewhere and it goes to someone else after that. So think about that. Next slide, please. This is a little bit hard to read, I know, but this is the entire city of Stillwater and all of the green are the sewer lines. The little red dots are what we call lift stations, meaning that it's a hole, it's like a big manhole or a square tank that has pumps in it. And when the elevation goes up to where the wastewater can't gravity flow to the wastewater plant, then it needs a little help getting uphill and so that it can continue to gravity flow. And so we have 16 lift stations in Stillwater that house 2 to 3 pumps, and you have to have redundancy because if one pump goes out, you've got to keep it flowing or it will back up. And I have to say, I'm very proud of our team of collection system workers here in Stillwater because they stay on top of it. They, you know, you don't see the sewer backing up into the streets. It's rare. That's because we keep these maintained. And so thank you to all the utility workers out there, the unsung heroes. Next slide, please. Oh, this is just a joke, but you know, you have to, maybe where you're going is not better than where you were. Next slide, please. And this is the sludge truck. This is that 4,000 gallon tank, and it takes expertise to drive this thing. You have to be trained and you have to be signed off on by someone who's watched you drive it. There's a few that do know how to run this truck. And you can see on the back those tubes. And then there's stainless steel injection tubes on the back. I think there's 8 that have to be replaced regularly. Sometimes they'll pull up a rock or something and it'll dent it, and you know that. But that's what goes into the ground, and it just kind of claws along, kind of like you're plowing. And but it does go pretty slow. Next slide, please. If there is one. If there's not, I would like to challenge you. One last thing. I'm going to give you a challenge. Okay. So let me change your mind about wastewater then. That it's not out of sight and out of mind. That it doesn't go into a big hole somewhere or disappear at all. And it does have a use, a very important use. It comes back to us as drinking water. Therefore, we educate. We educate to users to understand the process of treatment and how we do our part to make a better world for future generations. If it's not on your agenda, I hope to impress you to put it there. I have a water legacy that states, I hold the state of water dear to my heart as I hold my life. I state my position on pollution freely, without reserve for rank or class of person. I impress on all listeners the utmost importance of giving attention to their impact on clean water as the source of their life. And neither do I stand down to the malicious intent of polluters. What is your water legacy? Think about that, and maybe you could come up with one to leave for the future generations. Water is a living element, breathing, ever moving, but not producing. No more is produced than what we have. It benefits when in good form. Its purpose is to sustain. It cycles from rain to oceans to mist and to rain again, carrying with it the human component, what we have added to it and changed it and polluted it. We who have the knowledge are the keepers of it to maintain it and protect it for now and for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Questions? Any
Yeah.
questions?
Are there
Thank
questions
you,
from the
Luann.
class?
Can you tell us about your creative opera? Okay, now there's another question. I am curious about the pipe system from Call Lake to Stillwater. Could you describe it? Yes. There is a pump house at Call Lake that pumps the water into, I'm going to say 2 pipes. They're probably 60-inch, and they travel all the way underground to the water treatment plant, which is on the north side of town on Yost Road. You may have passed by a big water tank and you say, oh, there's a plant or something out there. That is the water treatment plant. And they will treat the water and send it out to you through distribution to drink. Are the pharmaceuticals ever taken out by anybody? No, they're not removed. It's a very expensive process to remove pharmaceuticals, and it would entail a lot of money to put some kind of equipment at the wastewater plant to pull it out. You can't, I mean, they dissolve, you know, like you can't get them back out without some kind of a elaborate treatment. Yes, they do accumulate and they mix. So I have heard that there are parties out there with young students that put all their grandparents and whatever they could get from medicine cabinets at home into a bucket, and then they grab a handful of all those mixed pills and take them. And I think that was a dilemma for our certain police force at one time. Students having overdoses and not knowing what drugs they'd been taking. So, yes. Any other questions?
I'm going to read you some, because we just had a flood of questions come through the chat, so to make it a little easier, I'm going to read them to you so we don't lose any. What do you think are some of the top, the most common problems or issues that you come across in the treatment plant? Obviously, it seems like wipes are one of the biggest problems, and pharmaceuticals that you can't really filter out. Any other?
Well, in the
things you would touch on there?
pharmaceuticals, I'll just say they are not regulated at this time. It takes EPA about 20 years to develop a limit for a pollutant. Because it has to be proven that it causes harm first. And so it could be chronic or it could be acute, you know, but most of it you're taking in little bits. And so it's a chronic issue, and it takes 20 years to develop a cancer from something that you've, you know, put in your system. And so they aren't regulated at this time. We move forward as we can. And what was the other part of the question? I'm sorry.
What are the other common problems that you encounter in the water treatment plant?
Grease will get clogged up in the system. So that's a big problem, especially in the wintertime, especially starting now with people in turkey fryers and putting the grease, you know, in places they should dispose of it properly at the convenience collection center, because the cold weather, you know, a lot of the grease that might be liquid at one time will go through the system and get hung up on some roots, tree roots. It'll get, hung up on wipes, of course, because they could accumulate. So wherever there's turns in the collection system, there's a chance for some kind of a blockage. And we all know that it's twisted and turned in every different direction. So another one of the problems is items that are, let me just say, for instance, one of the trailer parks had a blockage in their line and it was backing up into a trailer. And so we went out to look at it. It come to, we found it to be a rubber ducky. People having things flushed down the toilet or putting larger items, anything synthetic that goes into the sewer system is not good. Anything that won't break down. Kids, yeah.
Another question from Dr. Abbott's class. What is the main energy source that runs the water treatment plant? Are a lot of these running on electric power, or do they have to have their own generators?
It is electric. There are some, like the boiler it would be gas. So there is some natural gas, but mostly electricity. And it is the law for water and wastewater treatment plants to have a backup generator or another power source of some, if they say, well, we are at the end of 2 feed lines, so whenever power goes out on one, then that other one switches over automatically. But most treatment plants have pad mounted generators that will come on whenever the electricity goes out.
Another question from Chris Ramsey, kind of a follow-up to Chris's previous question about our drinking water in Stillwater. And he says, does anyone else use the water from Caw Lake, or are there any pipes that go into Caw Lake before it comes to Stillwater, or are there sort of pipes dedicated just to Stillwater?
I don't know the answer to that question, honestly. My main focus is on the wastewater side, but we do have people at City Hall that engineers in the water utilities engineering department that would be happy to answer those questions. If you want to call City Hall and ask for someone in water utilities engineering, or you could call the water treatment plant and ask the superintendent there. They might be better able to answer that question for you.
One of our other voices speakers, Jason Ahmet, talked about the Tyson and just chicken farming in general and the phosphorus that's run off into water sources. And so I think hopefully now some of our regular viewers are starting to become very aware of what is going in and out of our water system and how it's impacting our water table and us here in Oklahoma. So more questions from the comments. Keenan asks, do you add, or does the city of Stillwater add fluoride or chlorine excuse me, chlorine to the water or use it in the treatment process?
Yes, well, for water treatment, we do use fluoride. We do add fluoride, and we also use chloramines, which is a mix of chlorine and ammonia gas, for disinfection. By law, they have to be able to discharge a certain amount into the system. For wastewater treatment, we don't add any chemicals. We do have, if we were to use chlorine gas for disinfection, we would have to remove it before it went to the creek, because we could have 0 chlorine. But we use UV, and so therefore we don't need to do that extra process.
Are there other questions?
We do have another question in the chat from Chloe, and it sounds like Dr. Abbott is wrestling up more. Chloe asks, and this kind of touches on how you said microbes are highly sensitive, especially to pesticides, but is the water ever too toxic for the microbes to help keep it clean? Or you did mention that pesticides will sort of wipe them out. Is there any other substances that are kind of toxic to these microbe bugs?
Metals, heavy metals are. Now, the heavy metals that come into the plant will, they'll drop out in the sludge. But if we got a heavy dose of copper, or if we got a heavy dose of chromium, even arsenic and selenium, it could definitely harm the bugs and keep them from doing their process. And that's another thing with EPA is that if we do lose our bugs, we do test. We have to test some, it depends on the municipality. The larger ones, I know with the city of Lawton, we had to test 8 for toxicity, 8 months of the year. In Stillwater, we test for toxicity quarterly. And it's a rather expensive process. It lasts for 7 days, and you collect your effluent wastewater for 7 days, and you send it in, and they put it in Petri dishes, and they add things to it, and they find out how, what is there, some toxic substance that's going to kill them off. They tested on fathead minnows and Ceratophragma dubia, which are little water fleas, to see how toxic our water is to those wildlife. And the city of Lawton did fail for a number of months in a row. And then we had to undergo a toxicity reduction evaluation, which was about a $200,000 3-year process whereby we had to find the needle in the haystack, so to speak. We found that to be diazinon, and then we had to do a public campaign. We had poster boards out along the roads. We had pamphlets made. We gave school talks. We just whatever we could do, we had to put a plan together and submit it to Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality for approval. And we just went to it, and we just started educating the public. That diazinon has since been taken off the market. First you had DDT, and then it was taken off the market, and then diazinon was taken off the market 20 years later, and now 30 years later, we're talking Roundup. So that's pretty much the process of it. The city of Stillwater, to my knowledge, I went to that plant. I started managing that plant in 2012, but I was in pre-treatment before that. So I did a lot of the collecting of samples and testing from the industry's water. And as far as I know, it was maybe 2008 when there was a failure for the toxicity testing, but it has to be a failure for 3 months in a row. Sometimes it's just an upset from a temperature change or a pH dropout where the pH went a little low. It was an adjustment within the system. So it was in operations. And we only failed for the 1 month. And so we didn't have to go through that lengthy toxicity, the TRE they call it.
Great. I think all this is kind of fascinating. We have another question from Dr. Abbott's class. Do you know, does OSU have its own wastewater treatment facility, or is sort of the campus of OSU tied into the city of Stillwater?
The OSU campus has some sewer lines that come to the city. They are also on septic. They have septic tanks. They have lagoons as well. So there are those three different systems, like where your livestock and those type facilities are that are either at the edge of the city limits or outside of city limits. Those are going to go probably to a lagoon. There are other buildings outlying that are on septic tanks. And then the inner portion of OSU campus is they have their own sewer lines that would connect to our main lines, but they do discharge to the city of Stillwater Wastewater Plant.
Great. Another question from Chris. Do you know the state of the environmental habitat in the area just after the Stillwater treatment plant pipe goes into Brush Creek? Like, what is it like in Brush Creek where our treated wastewater sort of ends up?
Well, every creek and stream and river and lake is designated as ours is designated warm body fish and wildlife, which means that the water has to support wildlife, and that somewhere near the end or wherever it discharges to, whether it be Keystone or whether it be Texoma Lake, there are people swimming, and so that would designate it as a warm body. Most of the time, Brush Creek is pretty dry, and we are the only discharge in it. I have seen it bone dry, and then I have seen it flow pretty heavy during a heavy rain. But for the most part, the Stillwater wastewater treatment discharge is Brush Creek. And there's wildlife definitely out there in the country. So there is no impairment. It's not designated as impaired. Water Resource Board of Oklahoma will be in charge of designating which water bodies are impaired, and ours is not.
That's great. I don't know if you can really answer this one. I think we are all now super frustrated by the unflushability of flushable wipes. Dr. Abbott's class said, why are, quote, flushable wipes labeled that way if they are not biodegradable?
Well, they started out being flushable. I'm assuming that, you know, EPA can't be on top of everything all the time, and it has to be proved that they are not flushable. There's been a lot of testing done to find out which ones break down under which circumstances. And at one point, and it was during my time here with the city of Stillwater, that EPA mandated that they remove that off. They changed their labeling, but that was held up in courts of laws and legislature. And I think they were given, they were allowed to use what packaging they had already manufactured or were able to live out those contracts that they had with packaging companies. And then I lost track of it. So shame on me, but there's a lot to keep track of. And there's going to be a time when they do have to have that labeling. It can't say flushable.
I don't know if this is a question, but more of a comment on my end. I think one of the impactful things that I've pulled from your talk is, you know, all of these ways, little things that we can do to keep our water clean, not flushing wipes, not flushing your pharmaceuticals, being very mindful if you use chemicals or any products on your lawn or agriculture. But you said all of these things really drive up the cost for the taxpayers, because then you have to have people go clean out these pumps. I mean, do you think, you know, just everyone making a very small change could save us all a lot of money and really impact the water system, correct? I mean,
right, exactly. And it's the taxpayers own this system. This is their asset. And it, you know, to me, it seems like they should care about that. And I know that they do. But the problem is there's not an understanding of how it works. You know, they might see some guys out there working at a lift station in the middle of the night, and it's pouring down rain, and they're down in that hole and trying to get a pump going that needs to get going, and they don't understand what's going on. It's our job to educate. The ones who know carry that responsibility to let the ones that don't know how it works and how it operates. And I think with that understanding, if there's somebody watching today that didn't know anything about the flushable wipes, well, now they do. And so they can take part in, you know, making it better for everybody else. And realizing that, you know, it's just like recyclables. You know, you take things to the convenience collection center, and other cities take things to their collection centers. And at times there, you know, you got to picture this big conveyor belt, and you've seen it on TV, I'm sure, with all of these items, and there's people standing there picking certain things out and throwing them in the correct bins. But that doesn't mean that there's somebody picking things out of the sewer somewhere. It just doesn't work that way. So we have to just mind what we put down the sewer and then into it. We have to mind that. treat it like like you live in the country and it's a septic tank that you don't want to pay to have pumped out every month or every 3 months. You want to pay once every 5 years. You're not going to put those wipes in there. You're not going to put that stuff in there because you don't want to have to pay to have it pumped out too soon. It's not any different, just on a larger scale.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, you know, especially your talk, but a lot of the talks that we've had in the series just remind people, I think sometimes these issues seem so grand that we're at a loss. We don't know what we can do to really make an impact, but I think it's quite clear that just the small choices that we make every day have a very significant impact on our environment and our surroundings. So thank you for enlightening us a little bit more. I know none of us will ever look at wipes again after this, or maybe we'll think about microbes and bugs. We'll think about bugs a little bit differently. So thank you so much, Luann, for sharing your insight with us today. And thank you for everyone who logged on and attended. Special thanks goes out to museum staff for assisting in putting all this together and helping on site and online. Special thanks for this particular talk goes out to the OSU Ferguson School of Agriculture and Dr. Abbott's environmental science class, who are joining us live and are about to take on one of our STEAM activity design challenges. So I'd like to thank all of our promotional partners in launching this series. We worked to promote this series and to recruit speakers by partnering with multiple OSU departments, including Allied Arts, the Oklahoma Water Resources Center, Ferguson College of Agriculture, the Center for Sovereign Nations, the Edmund Lowe Library, the OSU College of Engineering, Architecture, and Technology, the OSU Art Department, and the OSU Office of the Vice President for Research. Again, if you'd like to learn more about how your classes, clubs, or student organization can get involved, please contact us. You can visit our website for more information at www.museum.okstate.edu. And before we sort of sign off today, is there any closing thoughts you wanted to share, Luann?
Just think about what your water legacy is. What do you want to leave for the generations behind you?
Exactly. You don't have to be a scientist or a water specialist, a utilities director in order to have a water legacy. And I think that's becoming abundantly clear to all of us.
Yes, it's all we have. Let's use it right.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining us. And if you are telling your friends all about how great this lecture is, you can find it next week on our YouTube page as well as our website. So thanks for logging in. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you very much for listening.